Whether you're just looking to stay warm during a hunt or need maximum concealment, the clothing you wear can make or break a hunt. At MidwayUSA.com, we understand hunting clothing has come a long way with more meticulously crafted camo patterns, advanced scent control technologies, and weatherproof options to withstand the elements. Hunters have to wait until their favorite season, but shouldn't wait on gear, which is why Midway USA offers super fast shipping. When you're ready for your next system, log on to MidwayUSA.com.
The only shooting stick with one-handed trigger pull adjustments has a new way to keep you at the top of your game. The Trigger Stick Apex. Built for sturdy support that adapts to unforgiving terrain with easy adjustments to make your big shots. With our DuraSteady 3-piece carbon leg design and interchangeable rock-solid clamp, nothing tops the Apex. The Trigger Stick Apex, only from Primrose.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast, brought to you by Huntworth. Huntworth gear for all types of weather, all types of terrain, all types of budgets. It's clothing that just works. Check them out at huntworthgear.com. And be sure to go over there and check out the new Vertec camo pattern. Super versatile, great camo pattern no matter where you're hunting, whether it's out west or in Cedar Swamp, like we got here in Michigan. So definitely check that out. And also, go over to Latitude. Look at the stuff that they're putting out. They've got the Maverick saddle, the Lone Star, the TX5 with Matt Tompkins. That saddle's coming out. And they've got a pack getting ready to drop. Tons and tons of awesome stuff over there. So definitely be following along with Latitude. And with Latitude, you can save 15% by using code BHC. Check out all of our sponsors, our partners. Big Shot Targets, you can save 10% with BCP. Spartan Forge, code Bowhunter. You can use 25%, and you need to do that online. And don't forget about Lucky Buck, Canati, Zinger, Genesis 3D. All of those guys, go check them out. Tell them we sent you. We love those guys. But, man, the season is just about here. We did some mock scrapes with some of the DH3, the deer hunter stuff. Really looking to see what shows up on those cameras. Got a few bucks on some cameras already. Really looking forward to this season, and get out there, go shoot your bow. Season's upon us. I basically, with everything that's going on, basically forgot that I was still going to Colorado. So I've been shooting my bow, getting that one dialed in. I think I'm going to shoot the bear this year. With the Canati M1s. That's what I'm going with, as well as shooting the trad bow. Feeling real good about the trad bow, but I just got some Zinger and Canati. They've got 400 spine arrows now, so getting a set of those set up for the stalker. So looking forward to that. But man, I feel like I'm way behind the curve because I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going elk hunting. I forgot about that. I'm getting ready for the Patreon hunt, getting ready to go to Kentucky. And, in between, there's a trip to Colorado. So don't be like me. Get on top of it. Start getting your gear together. Start shooting from height. Start practicing climbing trees, shooting from the saddle, shooting from your tree stand, all of that stuff. And as always, thanks for listening. Enjoy the episode. All right, everybody. Adam back with another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast. And today we're going to be talking with Jordan Hoover. He was a member of the Michigan DMI, and he is kind of, I don't want to say like a champion or advocate or whatever for a change within kind of like, we were talking about it earlier. I call it like whitetail politics, and kind of how can we actually make a difference, because it seemed like the state of Michigan really wanted to put this thing in place and make it look like, regular guys could sign up for this DMI. They wanted the information from the hunters, and then we'll let Jordan get into it, but it just really didn't play out like that. And it seems pretty obvious that there is some changes that need to be made, and it may not be strictly for the state of Michigan. This is probably happening in many other states across the landscape. and we see it, through our, like, what we love in the hunting and outdoorsman space. So, Jordan, how are you doing this evening?
I'm excellent, Adam. Thanks for having me on tonight. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I don't work very much, and I had to work a lot the last, by my standards, in the last 10 days. So I'm getting ready to take a couple weeks off to go build a beer festival. So it's not like I'm just going to be lounging around, but yeah, I'm doing all right. So, let's get into like your history. So from you, hunting and, in the state of Michigan, you're up in the UP. So like, what is your, history in the outdoors?
Well, Adam, I grew up with this way of life from the time that I was just a little boy. I either had a fishing pole or a bow in my hand. That was everyday life. My father, my uncles, my grandfathers, they were all outdoorsmen. They fished, they hunted, camped, everything you could think of, they did it. So for me, it was only natural that I fell in love with those things. It's what I was raised with. Now I have a family of 4 children and my wife, and it's the same thing in my house today that it was when I was a little boy. I'm passing on that heritage and those traditions now. But I've got close to 30 seasons under my belt now. Most of that has been spent grinding public land, backcountry hunting in the Upper Peninsula. I do rifle hunt, I do muzzleload, but my passion is bow hunting, archery. I'm in good company, I can tell. So that's in a nutshell, the 10,000 foot view. I mean, we're very active and engaged in an outdoor way of life. We hunt, we fish. Got a massive garden. I mean, I wouldn't call us preppers per se, but we live a pretty earthy lifestyle, and we like it that way.
So you being up in the UP, and I've spent more time in the UP probably than most trolls, as I'm sure you'd have heard us referred to. My grandfather grew up in the UP. We got lots of family there and in Wisconsin, and we've got a camp up there. But I haven't lived up there, but I've been, I don't want to like kind of ingrained with like the temperature of the population up there, I guess. And especially when it comes to hunting, how has that landscape of like, the hunting mentality changed over your 30 seasons in the UP? And I guess to that, how does it differ, I guess, when you talk to people from downstate?
Well, I think, I'll take the easier one first. I mean, the conversation about deer management is so different here from the Lower Peninsula. It's not even funny. I mean, it's overused, but the tale of two cities is the best way to say it. Perhaps the tale of two peninsulas. There might be similarities in certain areas of the UP to maybe the northern lower, but by and large, we have so much biodiversity in the state of Michigan. It's incredible. I spent some time down in the Thumb area this summer at the invitation of a couple of good friends, and they had a landowner there, a big farm. They were just overrun with deer. Crop damage was a serious issue. And, you say crop damage to a Youper, and I'm like, yeah, okay, crop damage. Sure. No idea the scale of the problem. And you get down there and, you watch 200 deer cross the road in 4 miles of highway, and the light bulb goes on. Holy cow, there's a problem. Deer densities were nuts. We actually ended up making 2 trips. We took 17 deer out of there on crop damage tags, and I'm not certain that we did anything at all. I don't think we made a dent. Conversely, you do that in an area up here in the UP, and there won't be a deer in that area for the next 2 years. It's so different. Obviously, our habitat is tremendously different than the lower. We've got a absolute suite of apex predators up here. That's a headline issue, of course, as I'm sure you're aware. But it's a whole nother world. As far as the hunter mentality goes, boy, I think that there's a budding crop of individuals coming up. I'd say, probably early 40s on down, of guys that are more management minded, guys that are starting to get into things like, well, gee, how can I manage my ground a little better? What can I do? How can I increase my odds by better managing my property? That mentality wasn't so prevalent even 10 years ago. I'd say that's definitely coming on strong. Guys are starting to delve into the education side, the biology side a little more. And I think that's a good thing. It makes us better stewards.
So, yeah, I mean, I grew up. It's so funny. I want to ask you like about the baiting thing up there, because my family, they owned my dad's uncle and aunt owned a grocery store, and so all of the old produce, like it was nothing to see deer out there eating on an old watermelon or zucchini or whatever. And they went so far as to hang cabbages by the roots, so that the deer had to, they were focused on it, So for the UP, do you, and from your, conservation background and kind of like the whitetail champion type thing, do you feel that like the baiting up there is still there just because of the culture? And it's like I guess I just feel like it's like the thing that the UP like that's the cross that they would die on. Like, you're not taking away our baiting. Or do you think it's like necessary because of the sparsity of the deer to increase the hunting or whatever?
So as far as the mindset there, I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head. That's the bait pile is like the holy ground up here in the UP. You start talking about taking away supplemental feeding or taking away baiting, any kind of deer feeding. It's like, oh, wait a minute, pump the brakes there, son. Yeah, that's definitely part of deer hunting culture up here. I mean, you go to deer camp and what do? Well, you make sure the wood stove's ready to go and you got all your food for the week, and you make sure you've got 50 metric tons of corn and carrots. It's how a lot of people do it. Not everybody, and I think that there's some change in that. Myself, I have stands I bait, I have stands I don't. It's situational for me, but I certainly did grow up with that. I was taught a little differently though, in that you locate deer by other means, understanding how deer use their habitat, how those seasonal shifts occur, feeding and bedding areas. How do you identify these things? I was taught all of that as a young man. So for us, it wasn't so much what I'll call negligent baiting, where you dump out bait with the intent of I'm attracting deer to the spot that I'm at. The deer were already there. It was just a matter of keeping them occupied and providing a nice, static, ethical shot for us. But yeah, that is definitely a big thing. It's ingrained in UP mentality, and I don't know if that'll die. I think that's probably something that's just part of the fabric of UP deer camp as much as firing up the sauna.
So from that, we've got, I don't know. So we do a Patreon hunt, and we've got, people that come from all over different states, and they come hunt here in the lower, and, you try to explain to them like, okay, well, if you cross this road, you can only shoot this many. This got to have this many points. If you have this tag, then you can shoot this. But if you buy the combo tag, then you can't shoot this and you can't shoot that. And then you've got the UP, which has a whole nother set of rules. And that kind of brings us to like the whitetail regulations and all of that. So I guess I'll start with like prior to this year. Like how were the hunting regulations decided upon for the state, each area, however you want to go about it? And then we'll dive into kind of like how things went this year.
Oh, how were they decided? Well, I'd like to tell you that the best available sound scientific evidence was first and foremost in the discussion and the deciding factor in that discussion. But if I told you that, I'd be full of crap. Unfortunately, Michigan, not unlike other states, I'm certain, just can't seem to separate politics from our natural resources decision-making process. And, you know, it makes people uncomfortable sometimes when I start hammering on special interest groups because they're like, hey, they do a lot of good. They plant trees or they this or they that. And some of them do. But the unfortunate thing is that a lot of the special interest groups have a lot of leverage. For example, in the state of Michigan, we have the Natural Resources Commission, and they are the end all be all. Buck stops with them. They make the decisions ultimately as to what regulations we're going to have. And unfortunately, there's not very good criteria currently installed for who's qualified to be a commissioner. You could have a panel full of men and women who are trout fishermen and rabbit hunters, and they're going to make your deer regs. Whether or not they know anything about deer hunting or even care to, that's who's going to make your deer regs. So the pitfall of that becomes when you have commissioners seated who don't participate in a given way of life, whether that was deer hunting, bear hunting, whatever it is, when they don't have a personal knowledge base to draw from, then they do the next best thing. And they go to a special interest group leader who they think they can trust. And they say, hey, Bob, hey, Tom, hey, Bill, tell me about bears, tell me about deer, tell me about, and they do, but they tell it subjectively. It's from their point of view. And they're obviously going to do their very best to get their agenda in play. That's what they all do, with few exceptions. And unfortunately, when you have any natural resources decisions being made with that level of political influence, what comes out the other end isn't always going to be in the best interest of the resource. And that's where Michigan has run afoul many times with regulations we've had in the past.
So in that, where does the Michigan Department of Natural Resources and our wildlife biologists, I had Chad Stewart on last year, and we talked about like the balance between deer numbers, deer populations. Now, I felt last year it was a step in the right direction by going to like the mandatory reporting, whether you reported it where you actually shot the deer or you reported it, as I know some people did, at the state capitol, because you just had to pin it on the map. But it was a step in the right direction as far as like somewhat of an accurate deer harvest to kind of make regulations going forward. Where does information like that or any of that stuff fall into these recommendations with the NRC? Is there any biologist or anyone from the Michigan DNR that sits on these boards or anything?
So the way it should work in theory is we have personnel that are fisheries biologists, that are large carnivore specialists, that are whitetail biologists, whatever it is. We've got biologists in all these different disciplines. And in theory, the NRC will absorb all the information they possibly can from those department heads. So since we're talking about deer, we'll just stay with that. Chad Stewart was our head deer biologist for the state of Michigan. So if we're going to make whitetail deer regulations, Chad Stewart's going to probably sit down with the wildlife chief, Sarah Thompson, ahead of time. They're going to have some discussion. Chad's going to talk to his stable of biologists, and they're going to put together a presentation for the commission. Now, in that presentation, there's going to be your pie charts, your bar graphs, your data points, more or less. And the department's going to make their presentation demonstrating the scientific conclusions that they reached. Why did we come to these conclusions? Well, here's how we reach those conclusions. And based upon these conclusions, we recommend the following this year for whitetail deer regulations. And then at that point, once the commission has heard the information from the department, then it's up to them to deliberate amongst themselves, to ask questions of the department, to seek additional input. Maybe they say, well, you know what, we like what you're saying here about APRs and chronic wasting disease, But we'd like to table this for right now because we'd like to get some more information from Minnesota, from Wisconsin, from Iowa, from whatever, and can compare and contrast that data. Then they make a decision. Ideally, that's how the process works. Unfortunately, we've got a broken process. Now, the NRC's mandate is Proposal G, 1996. And without boring you to death, Proposal G basically says this: the NRC is obliged to make all their natural resources decisions based upon the best available sound scientific evidence, end quote. There's no provision for things like social science, for example. It's biological science. And over time, we've seen an erosion of Proposal G and the influences of social science being injected. That's your politics, right? The biological science has to be first and foremost. Unfortunately, we've seen it play out many times where it isn't.
Are you overwhelmed by the hundreds of food plot mixes out there? Well, you are not alone. And Vitalize Seed has developed a program that takes the guesswork out of food plotting. Vitalize makes it simple with their 2 core mixes, Nitro Boost and Carbon Load. Nitro Boost is their spring-summer food plot mix, and Carbon Load is for planting in the fall, each having a diverse mix of over a dozen seed types that are highly attractive to whitetail. Food plotting made simple. Each mix provides necessary nutrients to the soil, making for better plots each season. This also saves you money by needing less Roundup and fertilizer every year. The 1-2 system simplifies your food plots just how nature intended. And for the more advanced habitat managers, Vitalize also offers a variety of natural amendments with products like their seed feed that offer seeds immediately available minerals ready as soon as they germinate. Make biology work for you. Order now at vitalizeseed.com.
So in the decision-making process, part of the issue that we have, at least in the state of Michigan, is we don't have great data. Cold hard truth, we don't have great data. You sit down and you say, Chad, how many deer do we have in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan? He's not going to BS you. He's going to say, Jordan, I don't know for sure. We can come up with an estimate, but he would hesitate to tell you, well, yeah, I'm pretty sure we've got 250 to 275,000 deer, whatever it is. He's not going to do that because we don't have the reliable data to say that. And that has occurred because over time we have shifted away from boots on the ground biology, and everything is heavily computerized now. It's all estimates and models and hypothesis and guesswork. And there's a place for those things in the scientific community, I think. And you'll see confidence ratings on things, right? Plus or minus 1% to 3%, whatever it is. I personally am pretty distrustful of a lot of the population models on computers and things like that. And I don't know, it was probably 8 years back or something now, they had bear population models for the state of Michigan on the computer, and the model crashed. Their models collided and they had nothing to start over. So first and foremost, you have to be able to supply real world, functionable, authentic data, which unfortunately we fall short with. There's a lot of base principles of deer management that are they're the same from state to state, right? You want to have a respectable buck to doe ratio. It doesn't matter if it's Iowa, Massachusetts, Texas, Michigan. That's a basic principle of deer management. And we can take care of business with those basic things, but to get more intricate and to get really into the nuts and bolts of management takes better data than we have presently.
And so so what you're saying is that there isn't anybody on the NRC is supposed to use that sound science to make their decisions, but there isn't anybody on the board from the DNR or anything like that. They're a complete and separate standalone entity. Whereas the DNR does not make any rules for I guess they just are the research and enforcement wing of this thing.
Well, I guess a better way to put it might be you could call the Department of Natural Resources your research and development team, and you could call the Natural Resources Commission your administration. or your board of directors, however you want to couch that. So the DNR director does sit with the Natural Resources Commission members when they hold their meetings. Director Bullen sits up front with them, and they have a lot of conversation, obviously, outside of these meetings. But yeah, the NRC has sole authority to regulate the manner and method of take for game animals in the state of Michigan. The department may recommend, but their capacity basically is advisory.
So with that, I can't even tell you how long I've seen it on, the Facebook groups. You see I don't know who does it, the billboards. I mean, I can remember being a kid seeing the let them go, let them grow from the QDMA, the $1 for Michigan, you name it. I'm sure there's one that's out there if you looked hard enough that said spikes are always spikes, kill them all. But there's definitely, I don't want to say, I mean, I'm sure that they distrust, but I think that there isn't anybody. I guess I would challenge that there is anybody that is really into the hunting culture, whether it's a guy who literally lives off grid in the woods in the UP, or a guy from, suburban Detroit who's really into deer hunting and really enjoys the culture, that thinks that the state of Michigan is doing a good job with their management, with the regulations, anything, and the way that I put it, like with Chad Stewart, and I think, in my group, and I think also it's really hard because when we do this, when we are on these podcasts and we surround ourselves with people who are so passionate about the same things that we are, we're really kind of in an echo chamber, and it's good to hear people with a much different perspective. But, all the guys that I talk to say, well, I would rather hunt Wisconsin. I would rather hunt Indiana, Illinois, basically every state that touches the state of Michigan, but nobody's really coming to the Michigan and saying like, man, and we have all the farmland. Like you said, we have this giant deer population, a deer problem in the agricultural parts of the lower peninsula. Maybe access is a problem there. And we can get into that when we get into the DMI stuff, but I don't think that anybody really thinks that anybody in the state of Michigan is doing a good job. And it seemed like maybe, just maybe, this year was going to be the year, because can you explain to us like the DMI and kind of how that came about and what that was supposed to be, I guess, in a vacuum?
Sure. So the DMI, or Deer Management Initiative, was basically the brainchild of the Natural Resources Commission. Bluntly stated, the NRC kind of took an ass kicking, verbally speaking, after last deer season, especially here in the UP. Harvest numbers were way down. And of course, anytime that happens, there's a lot of public unrest. Deer are, I'll call them a flagship species in the state of Michigan. They probably get more attention than the next three species combined. They're important to our state. And when the NRC started getting a lot of headache and a lot of feedback from Michigan hunters and interest groups, whatever else, it was kind of, well, we better do something. Well, what should we do? I don't know. What do you think we should do? I know. Let's have an advisory. Yeah, good idea. An advisory team. And I'm being comical about it, but I almost see that conversation in my head. Having a deer advisory team is not a new idea. It's been done before. Back after the devastating winters of 96 and 97 in the UP that set all-time snowfall records, we had RDAT, the Regional Deer Advisory Team. It was another situation where, hunters started getting loud and there was unrest and there was concern, and it was, well, what do we do? I don't know. What do you think we should do? Let's have an advisory team. So this was done before, and it just dissolved. It went away over time. But where I was optimistic about this, and why I really invested in this with the DMI is that for the first time in my lifetime, it wasn't just heads of traditional stakeholder groups that were going to be at the table. There was a concerted effort being made to get independent, unaffiliated, boot leather pounding bow junkies like me involved. There was a recognition of we need broader input and we want broader input at the table. That to me was a big step forward, because it makes no sense to continue to ask the same group of people the same questions, 5-10 years apart. You're going to get the same answers. So for me, that was a good indication that there was, at least by all appearances, an interest in authentic change. And they wanted a think tank that was going to produce something of value, as opposed to just kicking the can down the road and doing the token advisory team. So the commission tasked the department with assembling a team for the UP and the LP. And they were plus or minus, 20, 21 individuals per DMI team. And everybody was selected and we started work. There was an application process.
So how were people chosen? Because I know some people who had applied and they didn't get chosen. And we'll get into this further down the road, but you finally have empowered people, or you feel like you can't make a difference, and then you give them a shot. You say, okay, here's a thing. If you want to, if you don't like what we're doing, basically come do a better job, sign up, fill this out. So how did they choose? Because it seems like, at least to me, from the people that I've heard, the names that I've heard, and there was a guy that was, he's a life member of our Bowman's Club that was on the Lower Peninsula. And they actually had he had a little forum, like at our Bowman's Club here in April, to get, kind of feedback from this community. But it didn't seem like these were just some Joe Blow off the street. I mean, you got, I can't imagine like Bob Jones, right? I mean, he's the president of the Longbow Association or Michigan Bowhunters. Like, it just that random that he got chosen and some other Joe Blow. How are people chosen for this? So
I don't have complete insight into this. So part of this is just what I do know, and part of this is my conjecture. Traditional heads of stakeholder groups. So your NDA, they're going to get a seat at the table in both peninsulas. MUCC, they're going to get a seat at the table in both peninsulas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All your traditional stakeholder group leaders were going to be at the table. That was understood up front. But the independent and unaffiliated slots were where the magic happened. And I wish I could tell you, well, here's the rubric they used. And if you did this in your background, you got 2 points. If you did that, it was -2 points. I have no idea. I can tell you there was a quote unquote selection committee that was comprised of executive level department staff and the Natural Resources Commission. And they sat down together with a stack of resumes and went through them. I will tell you that, bluntly stated, not every resume that was submitted was looked at. I do know that. I think to some extent that there were individuals within the selection committee that had an idea of people that they wanted. But I can't necessarily say that they stacked the deck either. I'm certainly a wild card in that mix. I mean, I've been doing whitetail deer advocacy work for probably 15 years now in the state of Michigan. I'm not exactly, I guess, what you'd call a household name, but I've been around a long time. I've got what you'd call street cred, I suppose. But I wasn't sure I'd get in necessarily. I mean, I went and I got a letter of recommendation from a couple of my UP legislators, and I thought, well, that can't hurt, right? I took my best swing at it. I got in. There were other people that applied that I was kind of surprised they didn't get in. But there was a decent balance. I mean, they had some women on the team in both peninsulas. They had some diehard independent hunters, and they had some what I'll call recreational hunters. So there was some different perspective there. I was happy to see that. I felt like it was balanced overall.
Yeah, and so like I said, it's so hard, and all things being equal, the people who didn't get selected may be like, I'm glad I didn't waste all my time for this thing, just because it seems like that's the kind of the way that it went. But you can continue on about like so they assembled this group of people for the purpose of.
So they wanted broader input. There was a recognition that what we're doing isn't working and people aren't happy. So let's look at other options. Let's have some fresh ideas at the table and let's go through it all, start to finish, exhaustive review, and see what we come up with. After the application process, I think we started work about the middle of February was when we really cranked up. We had our first session. We had roughly 2 months of virtual meetings conducted by Microsoft Teams, which is similar to Zoom. So we had 40 DMI members. We had Chad Stewart. We had our wildlife chief, Sarah Thompson. I did see some of the NRC commissioners attend some of our educational sessions. So when I say educational sessions, the department would bring in experts in a certain discipline. For example, northern hardwoods regeneration would be a lecture topic for an evening. So they would have somebody from Forestry Division come in that had extensive experience in northern regions with hardwoods, and they would talk all about them exhaustively for an hour, hour and a half, and we'd have some Q&A time after that. Then there would be a second presenter, and maybe that was predator-prey relationships. So we want to talk about all of the hard facts, the numbers of, well, just how many deer are being killed by coyotes, by bears, by wolves, by bobcats, what's the overall impact? So we had large carnivore specialists like Brian Roll come in and talk to us, Cody Norton. We had people from out of state. We had a team from Wisconsin, Department of Natural Resources, come in and talk about hunter demographics and trends in hunter numbers, hunter participation, kind of all the socio-political factors. And that went on a wide array of topics for, like I said, about 2.5 months. We met 2 nights a week for probably about 3 hours each time. It was good information. I mean, I wasn't necessarily blown away by anything that I was presented. I thought there were a couple lectures that were better than others, but I'm a deer junkie. I'm a data nerd. I eat this stuff for breakfast. I love it. So I'm pretty abreast of all the information as it was, but I thought it was really good. It was valuable that they took that step and they took that time to bring all the DMI team members up to the same speed, looking at the same data, having the same conversation. I thought that was good because no matter what your background or your experience level was, whether you're 25 or whether you're 65, we're all looking at the same information. We're all on the same page. I thought that was important. And my hat was off to the DNR that did a really good job with how they orchestrated that whole educational process. So once that was all completed and we were armed with what they considered sufficient information, each team had an in-person meeting. And the Lower Peninsula team met a week before we did down in Bay City. And it was like a day and a half in-person meeting at a hotel, a conference center kind of thing. We would meet 1 week later and do the same thing. And ours was in Marquette. So day one of the in-person meeting, they had a lady by the name of Alexa Warwick from Michigan State University, who is more or less I'll call her the MC or the proctor for the in-person meeting. And what she does is she runs work groups. She runs think tanks. That's her expertise. Chad and Sarah were, of course, there and guiding the process along. Chairman Tom Baird and Commissioner Dave Anthony were also present for our in-person meeting here in the UP. But day one was non-regulatory issues. So when I say non-regulatory, something that's not a deer reg. So somebody says, well, I think that we ought to do a better job of trying to get hunter education put back into the public school system because that's going to increase hunter numbers and we need that. So we want to put emphasis on hunter education in public schools. That would be an example of a non-regulatory item. Or it could be discussions about how to improve thermal coverage, winter habitat in the Upper Peninsula. Anything that wasn't a deer reg, period, but yet pertained to deer and deer hunting. We had poster boards all over the walls around the whole room. We had probably 200, 250 ideas scribbled all over these poster boards, and a lot of them didn't get retained just for lack of time. If there's one thing I can say that was a huge downfall of this whole process, is that it was so rushed, it was so compressed. We had a mountain to climb to get anything respectable out of it just by virtue of the lack of time. And I'll pause right there for just a second to state that when the NRC put this DMI thing together, the department initially told the commission that they would need 10 months to a year for this process. The commission said no. And essentially, the commission went on to tell the department, we're going to change deer regs for 2024 with or without a recommendation from this DMI group. We'd prefer to have it, but if not, we're pulling levers and flipping switches anyway, which to me is mind-blowing. We're not going to wait for the science. We're going to make decisions. Write that one down. So we were under the gun from the get-go with essentially 3 months to do what the department wanted a year to do. It's a big ask, especially when you're dealing with a group of largely, I'll call them laymen, right? Because I think we had 2 people in our DMI in the UP that were actually biologists. It's a huge ask. So time was a factor, and everything was very compressed. It was very rushed. And through day one, there were a lot of good things, a lot of good ideas that ultimately got knocked off the board or never made it into the final categories simply by virtue of we didn't have the time to discuss everything. We had 200 things on the wall and we've got 25 minutes to discuss. Well, it's impossible. So that was frustrating to some extent, and a lot of good ideas were lost during that phase. We moved into day 2, and it wasn't a full day. It was about a half day. I think we were there until maybe 3 or 3:30 that afternoon. That was all about making deer regs. That was where the sausage got made. Regulatory issues. Essentially, we came in that morning, everybody had their little piece of bakery, their donut, their coffee, whatever it was, and sat down at our respective tables and started to BS. And next thing we know, boom, we're told we got 25 minutes to make deer regs. We're like, holy smokes. I didn't sleep very good that night before. I never sleep good when I'm away from home. You put me in a hotel and I'm just not going to sleep. So I was up. I was at the gym at 5 o'clock that morning. I was ready to go, but we had guys that were staggering in, fresh out of the rack, rubbing the sleep out of their eyes still, and now they got to make deer regs in 25 minutes. It was a sobering morning. I thought it was kind of egregious to have to do something like that in such a short span. So each table had a poster board, and we had 4 to 5 people at each table, and they basically said, here you go, take your Sharpie marker and make a regulations package. Everything that you guys at this table think is going to make whitetail deer hunting in the state of Michigan in your respective peninsula better, go. I was fortunate. I felt like I had a pretty good crew of guys at my table. We did the best we could. 25 minutes vanished into thin air, as I'm sure you can imagine. And when the timer went off, we looked around the room and there were 5 boards. We had A, B, C, D, and E. And then we started narrowing things down. And 3 of those boards said exactly the same thing in exactly the same language with exactly the same hand-drawn picture. So that kind of caught everybody's attention. There was a group of special interest leaders there that were trying to do what they could to make sure they had broader representation than their numbers should permit. And that's why there were 3 boards that said the same thing. Alexa picked up on that right away. She looked around at the boards and she kind of smiled and she goes, so we're not going to vote on the same thing 3 times. We're going to make those 3 boards one board. The coffee club wasn't real happy about that. But, she made it clear we're not dismissing these recommendations. We're just condensing. So at that point, we were left with 3, A, B, and C. And what we were asked to do at that juncture was to vet those regulatory recommendations against our management objectives. So at the onset of this process, the department asked us, what are the outcomes you want to see? What do you want to achieve through these regulations? What are you looking to accomplish? What are your management objectives? So they put all those things that we stated as a team up on the overhead in front of us. And they said, look at the 3 boards, A, B, and C. Which board is least effective at achieving the management objectives set forth by this team? That board gets eliminated. Well, that was the B board, which was the coffee club, the guys that tried to triple up. They were pretty upset, vocally so. Had one of them left the meeting, had a couple others that crossed their arms and slouched in their chairs and didn't want to participate anymore. Kind of just sour grapes. That left us with A and C. And I figured at that point we would again get the same question. Well, which board does it better, kind of thing, a head to head. And that's not what we did either. Instead, we took both of those boards and kind of exploded them up on the screen, and we line item voted on each individual piece from A and C. So ultimately what happened was the final 2 boards were woven into this patchwork quilt that became the team's final recommendation. I didn't have any qualms with how the process was conducted. I thought everything was done in a very organized manner. Things moved along quickly. There was never a point in time where I'm like, I don't know about this. I don't like the way they're doing it. Everything went smooth. It was good. It was clean. It was easy to follow. I guess I would say we went through due process and we had a fair vote. We came to a conclusion. So that's kind of the 10,000 foot view of that process. And when that was all done, then we had a final report that had to be written by one member of each team. I think Mike Kettlar was the final report writer for the Lower Peninsula team. And I wrote the final report for the UP team. And basically, what that encompassed was we had to rustle up all the pie charts, bar graphs, relevant data, catalog all the educational courses, and basically make a big presentation for the commission that here's how the whole process went. These are the things that we did. Here's the information that we reviewed. Here's the conclusions that we reached, and this is why. And those final reports were submitted on May 24th.
So one of the things I wrote down when you were saying that is you said that with or without their recommendation, with or without the recommendation of the DMI, that they would prefer to have it, but they were going to make a decision either way. If I recall from hearing you speak before and hearing Rochelle speak at the latest meeting, the UP was 0 for 9 in your recommendations. So none of your recommendations were taken. Do you think they had a predetermined outcome and this was all smoke and mirrors? And in that, do you think those 3 identical boards were reflective of the actual the outcome?
So I would certainly say that for the casual observer, it's pretty easy to look at this situation and say, oh yeah, They knew what they were going to do from the onset, and this was just all, bread and circuses. This was a smoke and mirror show. I don't think that that's entirely true, though. I really don't. I think that the intention was good at the onset, but I think that the commission realized very quickly that the depth and breadth of the problems was much bigger than they were prepared to deal with. I don't think that the commission had a good working knowledge on the subject matter, save one or two. And I think it overwhelmed them. I think that when they looked at our team's recommendations and they looked at our body of work, I think they were drowned. And a lot of them aren't deer hunters. Hey, that's part of the problem. We've got a committee full of attorneys who are trout fishermen making deer regs. I'm sure if we were discussing what the brook trout creel limit should be, that they would know exactly what to do. Unfortunately, they're not deer hunters, and most of them aren't from the UP, and therefore we have a problem. So that again ties back to what I said earlier about the commissioners lacking the requisite knowledge base on the subject matter and deferring to special interest because they're ignorant. And when special interest gets that opportunity, they sink their teeth in. That's pretty much the story of what happened to us in the UP. Were the three boards reflective of that? Absolutely. We had individuals in our team that were going around behind the scenes, holding private little meetings right from day one, that there was a small collection of these UP stakeholder leaders that had a management plan out of the gate. This is what we want to do. These are the regs we want. And here's a map of where we want to assign, whatever, a combo tag here and no does there and, no spike horns here. That was in play from that bunch right from the drop. Before we'd even had any educational classes, before we'd gotten anywhere in the process, they were pushing an agenda. And that agenda is ultimately what pretty much was adopted in the end game. So circling back, no, I don't think that the intent was to waste everybody's time, but I don't think that the commission has the resolve or the knowledge base to adequately address the problems. And it's simply easier to default to special interest and say, well, what do you want us to do? It's the easy way out.
Well, then let me just address kind of like the elephant in the room. If people are listening and they've got this far, they're sitting here just like me saying like, well, what in the hell? How do these people get to be on this board? Who is the board appointed? Is it voted upon? And why is there, I guess, and what is a requisite to be on the board?
So the Natural Resources Commission is a 7-member board, and they are appointed by the governor. So technically they are political appointees. They are not elected office holders. Okay. And just for conversation's sake, the DNR director is also likewise a political appointee appointed by the governor. So that's going back to what I said earlier about the issues with politics and natural resources decision making. You can see where this creates a problem right out of the gate when the people who are supposed to be making sure that politics isn't impacting natural resources are themselves politically appointed. We're not off to a good start. So how does that work? Well, you can go to the .gov, Michigan.gov website in our case for the commission, and there's digital paperwork that you fill out. I would like to be eligible for an appointment for X. There's all kinds of different governor appointments. The one for the NRC is on there. So there's like a 250 word max essay that you can write, basically explaining about yourself. And they want to know, what's your education, what's your background, are you a he, she, they, them, whatever, what's your political affiliation, all those sorts of things. Hand in glove with that, you basically need the blessing of a legislator to get your name to the governor's desk. as far as a list of qualifications, you must have X or be X or possess X, doesn't exist that I'm aware of. Doesn't exist. So you don't have to have a biology degree. You don't have to be a minimum of whatever, 35 years old. There's nothing. It's at the discretion of the governor.
And are these board members? Is it a paid position?
No, it is not. They do receive a pretty healthy stipend for travel and per diem and things like that. But as far as I am aware, it is a voluntary position. There is no payment. There's no salary. I have my suspicions that perhaps there's compensation that occurs, but there's nothing I can prove. You know? So when the governor decides that she wants to appoint a new commissioner, okay, let's say there's an open seat right now. The governor opens up a manila folder on her desk and she looks through all the applicants. And she says, I like these two guys and this one girl here. Yeah. So then there's something called the State Senate Advice and Consent Subcommittee. And what's supposed to happen is the governor passes on her selections for appointment to that subcommittee in the Senate, at which point they call those individuals in and basically conduct an interview. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about your background. Tell us about a time that you thought the DNR did something really stupid and what you would have done different. You know, whatever the case may be. It's basically an interview process. Unfortunately, for the most part, that interview process is by and large a rubber stamp. It's kind of a dog and pony show. Unless there's something real egregious in somebody's background or there's a big political game afoot, it's pretty much a rubber stamp. So from that point, I'd say it's less than 30 days, and then the commissioner is seated, and they'll serve a term of 4 years. And they're eligible for reappointment for an additional 4 years consecutively before they have to cycle out. So they could serve 8 years consecutively as a commissioner before they have to cycle out, being eligible again 4 years later. We've seen several commissioners over the years. J.R. Richardson's a good example. He's been a commissioner several times through the years. There is an MCL, Michigan compiled law, that delineates, there may not be more than 4 members of any one political party seated on the commission at a time. So current situation, maximum of 4 Democrats. And ideally, they like to have an independent, couple Republicans, whatever. That's kind of the 10,000-foot view of the base structure of how that works. And
so do you know, I would imagine you have some sort of idea of where the current commissioners are at in their 4, 8-year tenure at this point?
Yeah. So if you go to the DNR website, there's a tab up on the top towards the right. It says About Us. You click that and you scroll down, you'll see a secondary tab called Boards and Committees. You click that. Then it will create a drop-down menu and it will show you Natural Resources Commission. You click that and you will be able to go to each individual commissioner, and there's a brief bio. It shows when they were appointed, when their term expires, all that kind of information.
Okay. So, I mean, because I feel like that's getting into the kind of like where this is headed here in a moment. But so back to like the DMI, the no they didn't take any of your recommendations. They took 2 from the Lower Peninsula that were fairly vanilla.
Yeah.
And so collectively, did the NRC see this as it was a positive thing? Because I feel like every time something like this happens, there's always like that people try to put a positive spin on it. Like, so the NRC, look at all the great stuff they did. They put together this commission, blah, blah, blah. Like, did the NRC think that this was a win? Like it was a good thing? Like, or is this kind of something that where they see, whether it's from public outcry, from the reaction, that they just fell on their face and that they need to do something different going forward? I mean, I guess what can we expect from the current NRC going forward in regards to like the backlash from this DMI?
So I think that there's a world of difference between what they would probably say privately versus what they will say publicly. They're going to play the political game. And like you said, they're going to put the positive spin on, and they're going to smile, and they're going to talk about all the positive that's come from this process and the good foundation that's been built for moving forward in the future, blah, 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 blah. Privately, I would tell you that it blew up in their face. Absolutely blew up in their face. They were not expecting this to require the level of work that it did. They were not prepared for the passion and intensity of Michigan hunters at the table. And they weren't knowledgeable about the subject matter. And I think when you stuff all that in a blender and turn it on and try to have deer regs come out the other end of that blender, there was only one possible outcome. But really, they have themselves to blame. As I talked about early on, the department told them bluntly up front, we need 10 months to a year. The commission said, no, we're not going to give you the time we need to do the work. We want it now. Well, this is now. Do you want a nice filet mignon that we took the time to carefully prepare and serve up to you just the way you like it with all the fixings, all the sides? Or do you want a McDonald's cheeseburger? Well, what we got's a McDonald's cheeseburger because it's all we had time for. I think that the commission has publicly stated that, they think the DMI was a positive and that this isn't the end. This is just the beginning. I believe that's how the chairman had said it. I can tell you, I think that's pretty disingenuous because I don't think that most of the DMI team members would even waste their oxygen coming back for another seat at the table. And I don't think the NRC is going to want to keep it going moving forward. Originally, a lot of us did feel like there was value to this team. You put so much time, money, and effort into assembling this group of people to do this task. Why waste it? Keep it going. And I pointed out to the commissioners, like I shared with you earlier in conversation, that we had RDAT before, Regional Deer Advisory Team. So there was a precedent. There was a need for this kind of a group for an advisory team like this before. Now we're back to it again. So it would be reasonable to assert that at some point in the future, a team like this will be necessary again. So why not keep this group of people together that you've invested all this time and effort in? I don't care, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, but put a sunset on it. I don't care. But keep the team together and keep it going. And like I said earlier, whitetail deer in the state of Michigan are a flagship species. Very important to our communities, our culture, to our identity, really. And they're worthy of that. It's worthy of having that standing advisory team that is always working with the department, trying to make things better. That's what stewardship is. Stewardship is an action word. And I think that there was a very positive possibility of that. But unfortunately, the way that the commission has handled this, basically all but unilaterally rejecting the recommendations and some of the antagonistic attitudes that have been displayed by certain commissioners and how they've conducted themselves with interest group leaders, I think it's really soured a lot of people. And I don't think that there's very many of us that are too warm and fuzzy about working with this current commission in the future. To say that there was a lot of angst and upset would be an understatement. We have families, we have children, we have wives, we have our jobs, we have hobbies. We put everything on hold for 4 months to do this. And there was nobody at the table that wasn't absolutely passionate about a better future for our deer herd in the state of Michigan. Everybody was invested. And when you pour yourself into something like that, like we all did, and you have this kind of a cataclysmic outcome, yeah, people are deflated. People are upset. People are looking for answers. And commission, really hasn't provided it. Ultimately, the decisions that came out the other end of this, and in my opinion and many others, aren't really regulations that are supported with best practices, with sound scientific evidence. Um, it begins to make a person question, what exactly is the basis for these decisions? It's supposed to be the science. It wasn't. Well, what about social science? Well, they didn't listen to the advisory team, so that's out the window. So just how did a group of attorneys who are trout fishermen come to these conclusions without listening to the department, without listening to the advisory teams? Who steered the ship?
Right. And so when we get, that was the next question that I was going to ask, is like, so you talk about these like special interest groups and things like that. Like, and again, we had talked on the phone last week or something like that. And I said, when you get into these conspiracy theory type discussions, like what always comes up is, well, they want total control. They want, and it's always like, well, who is the they? Who in this case like stands to benefit from terrible deer regulations?
Well, that's a very honest question, and I like that one. So, first of all, I will say I don't think anybody wins when there's horse crap deer regulations. There may be people who are ignorant enough to believe that they're winning, which I think is the case in the UP. But ultimately, no. At the end of our process, at the end of the road for the DMI, the resource lost and the Michigan hunter lost. So who won? Well, a few special interest groups think they won. And they think they won largely because, very simply stated, they got what they wanted. Whether or not what they wanted was biologically right is immaterial to them, and you'll never convince them that they're wrong. They're so dyed in the wool with their particular ideology that they cannot possibly accept that perhaps they don't know what they think they know, that perhaps deer biology has advanced leaps and bounds since 1970, that we know more today than we ever had before, and that maybe, just maybe, the way we were doing things was wrong. A friend of mine asked me years ago, we were having a discussion about an unrelated matter. He says, Jordan, how would you know if what you knew was wrong? I said, well, I suppose you'd have to begin with being open to the possibility that you are wrong. He says, exactly. Humility. And I think that's lacking with a lot of these individuals. There's a definite arrogance to the arguments that have been made. I typically find that good leaders and people who are standing on factual information, when you question them, they don't get angry. They don't get upset. They indulge your question. And they take the time to explain to you rationally why they believe what they believe and how it works. Now, we might not agree still after you do that, and that's fine. But the point is, it's the attitude and it's the demeanor. They're calm, they're collected, they're reasonable, they're rational, they're sensible. And we haven't seen that with some of the leadership from these groups. Like I indicated to you, we had a guy get up and walk out of the meeting. Not cool-headed, not rational, not reasonable. The end of the meeting, we had one of them same guys down in the hotel lobby yelling at one of the commissioners. You could hear him from 50 feet away across the hotel lobby. Not calm, not collected, not rational. Now, deer, don't get me wrong, deer are a passionate subject. But when we're talking about the logistics, the mechanics, the biological necessities of what it takes to make our deer herd better, it's a discussion that we can have rationally, calmly, in a collected manner. So I think it's important to note that hasn't transpired with these individuals. But how do they benefit? Very simply, some of these individuals who are in leadership in these stakeholder groups get off on the power of holding the gavel. They're retired, they got nothing better to do, and it makes them feel important to be able to sit down at the table and belly up to that microphone and say, well, on behalf of 40,000 members, they're self-important. They don't place the resource first, the personal agenda first. How do I know? Well, when you have a conversation, for example, like sex ratios, huge problem here in the UP. We've got sex ratios that are, I would comfortably say on average, 12-1 across a lot of the areas that I hunt, worse in some places. That's a monstrous problem. You tell any respectable deer manager anywhere in the country, I've got a 12-1 buck to doe ratio, their eyes are going to get as big as saucer plates and they're going to say, wow, you've got a big problem. You need to do something. You say that to these fellas and they laugh at you. Think, well, you don't know what you're talking about. It's, we need to save all the does. We can't possibly shoot any does. The holy doe worshippers, we call them. There is such a disconnect from the reality of what is and is not effective deer management. It is virtually a cult. And unfortunately, in a lot of these situations, these guys they've been in these chairs a long time, right? So there's a certain amount of rapport and respect that people have for them simply by virtue of the length of time they have been there. It has nothing to do with the things that come out of their mouth or the credibility thereof. It's, well, I've known Joe for 30 years. Well, that's fine. I'm sure Joe's a good guy. I'm sure he's been the best neighbor you ever had, best coworker you ever had. I'm not going to make a judgment on Joe's character. But maybe Joe doesn't know shit about deer management. There's plenty of people who are cooks. They've been cooking their whole life and they still can't cook to save their ass, right? They'll burn the meatloaf or whatever it is. Time spent doing something doesn't necessarily equate to expertise in that discipline. And so, that's a lot of the problem we're having.
So when you're talking about, and I know it's tough because it ends up, maybe calling people out in some way, shape, or form, but you keep saying like these special interest groups or whatever, but you haven't said the group. And it's like, if there are listeners out there that are supporting these groups who are, it's difficult. So can we, like, who are these people? Not the name of the guys on the commission or whatever. I mean, I imagine people could put two and two together, but like, it's like we talked about on the phone, there's people who are very jaded by things like the backcountry hunters and anglers and like the things that went on like with them. And, I can think of like from a veteran standpoint, like the Wounded Warriors Foundation, they take all the money and they pay themselves for it. They're, as far as like being a nonprofit, people think that it's a great thing until somebody says, hey, look into it. And so for these groups or these things, I mean, are they bad organizations as a whole? Do they have bad leadership? Like what's going on? Because I mean, like that's the shit that I'm going to get at the end of the day is like, you didn't even ask them who the people are. You know what I mean? So
sure. So we'll just dive right off the diving board here. So in the context of the Upper Peninsula, we don't have a ton of organizations here. We have three primary organizations. Okay. We have UPSA, which is the Upper Peninsula Sportsmen's Alliance. We have the UP Whitetails Association. And then way over on the east end, you have the Straits Area Sportsmen's Club that covers both sides of the Big Mac. And that's pretty much it as far as bona fide stakeholder groups. I mean, you've got some participating sportsman clubs and things like that across the UP, but that's not really what I'm speaking to. So when I'm talking about the Coffee Clutch Club of these old heads that come from the stakeholder groups, I am speaking about UPSA and I'm speaking about the UP Whitetails Association. Now, I'm not going to condemn the organizations as a whole and say they're full of deplorable people. Well, that's not true at all. Not true at all. But The problem is there are a lot of individuals that like we talked about, are very passionate about deer, and they want to get involved, and they don't necessarily know how to get involved. The easiest way to do that is to wander down to a UP Whitetails meeting, for example, and say, hey, I'd like to be a member. Okay, well, put your $50 in the hat, whatever it is. And from there, you feel good because now you're a member of this organization that's, as far as you know, promoting good things for the deer herd and doing good work. And oh, they're a 501. They're nonprofit, charitable organization. This is great. On its face, it's a good thing. But unfortunately, all too often, what people do when they join these groups, Adam, it's what I call subcontracting. Okay. You, me, everybody else that's a hunter, fisherman, outdoorsman in the state of Michigan, we have a personal responsibility to be a steward of our resources. It's a personal responsibility. And it gets real easy when you join an organization to subcontract that responsibility. You pay somebody else $50 to do the job that you should be doing, and you never even think to check if they're doing the job. You assume they're doing the job. Just like you referenced the Wounded Warriors Project, right? Oh, they're doing good things for veterans. I'm sure they're stand-up guys. I'm sure everything's on the level. And how long did all that go on before the light bulb went on for and somebody checked and they're like, I don't think this is right. And then the lid came off the dumpster. It's kind of the same thing here. And I'll give you an example. I had prior experience with UP Whitetails Association because at one time I was a president of a Whitetails chapter here in the UP in Baraga County. And when I took over as president, I was the treasurer previously. Okay. So I had some measure of knowledge of what was going on. One of the things I wanted to change right away was supplemental feeding, because past practice was we spent tens of thousands of dollars on hay every winter for supplemental feed. People are big on that. They love the supplemental feed here through the winter. I said, well, hey guys, listen, maybe this year, what we're going to do is we're going to sit down with our local biologist at the field office, and we're going to talk to them about which deer winter complexes or specific migration routes we could put this hay at to maximize the benefit for our herd. Because I think that would be a lot better than Bob, Tom, and Joe rolling a bale out to the camp. Those guys were ready to shoot. It was mind-blowing to them that I would ever conceive of taking away their hay. It was eye-opening for me. And I said, well, listen, fellas, we solicit money from the public at these banquets, right? We want everybody to come to our banquets and buy a dinner ticket and drink some beers and participate in the raffles and get a door prize and bring your neighbor, bring your friends, bring your wife, bring your kids. And we tell the public that this money that we take in is then used for the good of the deer herd in our county. Said, but if all the hay is going out to your personal camp, is that true? Said, I don't feel comfortable with that. In fact, I feel like that's fraud. Yeah. It was a pretty unhappy room. It was a pretty unhappy discussion. So that's one example. Okay. And we talk about the responsibility of stewardship. There are chapters of whitetails that do get out and do some habitat work, right? And I think that is an imperative thing. That's a good thing. Whether they're improving breakout areas or they're trying to plant some cedars and some hemlocks and cage them off, whatever. There are those cells that do that, but that's the exception and it's not the norm. Unfortunately, what a lot of this is we have an annual banquet, we drink beer, we raffle off some guns, and we all go home feeling good about ourselves because we put a buzz on and we gave some money for conservation. In the end, you didn't do nothing. I don't think that we need more people to come and drink beer. I don't think that we need more hay bales. I don't think that we need more gun raffles. I think we need more time, money, and emphasis placed on educating people about what exactly does it take to improve things for our deer herd. What is good forestry practices? What happens when our buck-to-doe ratio is out of balance? Talk to me about fawn fecundancy rates. Education is the backbone of stewardship. How can you possibly take care of a resource when you don't understand what's required to care for that resource? There's a lot of places we can put that money. There's a lot of things that we can do to better inform our clubs and our memberships. And unfortunately, there's just not a lot of interest in those things within some of these organizations. They are perfectly content to drink beer, to raffle guns, and to go home feeling good. And for me, and a lot of younger guys coming up after me that are more management minded, that want to get out and lace up our boots and pick up a shovel and plant trees, and we see the problems, we're not interested in beer anymore.
So from that, and I mean, I thought you were going to go like a little bit different direction with that, just in the sense of like, so I'm on the board for our Bowman's Club, and I revamped our whole fundraiser thing this year. So like, I know exactly what you're talking about. And what I guess kind of like where I thought you were going is that like, I got in there and they said, well, this is the way that we've always done it. And I'm like,
Sure.
well, that's not going to work. Like this is how we're going to do it now. Well, but then you have to build rapport and you have to like kind of show them that you can do that. But I think from the standpoint of like action is that, you know, you have to go in there and you have to be able to kind of take charge and say, okay, there's going to be another, the next regime that comes in. And, you know, we've had these discussions because at our Bowman's Club, and I don't necessarily need to get into all of it, but we've started our own nonprofit to give, because it's all about archery. It's not necessarily a deer hunting club. It's for archery. So we're giving, you know, scholarships to members of the club and people who do our S3GA, the archery stuff, through that. But we've had these discussions where it only takes one generation or one thing to just say, well, I'm just going to vote in my whole family and now we can run the whole thing and do whatever we want to.
Right.
And it's kind of what you're saying is that, you know, they're in these organizations. If we don't get some of these people who are fired up, young, you know, inspired or whatever in there, we're going to keep getting what we've been getting, because that's by just saying, oh, well, you know, Tom's the president, so that's what he does, you know, by going to the board meeting, by showing up, by, you know, advocating for change, or stepping up and saying, hey, you know, whatever, I just want to sit on the board and I want to see how these decisions are made and then make a decision on how I think we can do this going forward. So I'm, you know, you're speaking to me on that, because it's like, well, I thought you were going to say like, we buy the hay from Bob and Jim and we can't take the money. You know, we can't take the money out of their pockets. They're already counting on us, you know, because that's where we get the hay. We don't deviate from that. And those little like political game type stuff.
Well, I'll share another one with you. Just a quick anecdote. You know, one of the things that I brought to the table with the UP Whitetails Association was I noticed right away that our club had no clue about how bad our habitat issues were. Like, it wasn't a discussion that was even happening. And that's one of the headline issues that we're facing today. You get this far north and Old Man Winter is well and truly who manages the deer herd. The DNR just thinks they do. That being said, you know, the winter habitat is an absolutely vital piece to deer management in the UP. And I don't care what else you do. If you don't have adequate habitat here, our herd's in trouble. So I was pretty appalled that wasn't even a consideration. It wasn't a discussion at all amongst that club. So I brought it up. And everybody kind of looked at me like, well, what are you talking about? It was almost like, well, yeah, there's lots of trees in the woods, Jordan. What do you mean? It was literally that basic. And I'm trying to explain all the aspects of this and the cascade of negative impacts. I'm just getting blank stares. I said, okay, well, listen, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get with the department. I'm going to get a guy down here from forestry and get our wildlife biologist down here to kind of talk to you guys about this stuff a little bit. And they'll be able to articulate a lot of this far better than I ever could. Like, this is the direction that we need to start going. And did you guys know that they have a habitat improvement grant? Everybody's like, oh, no, I don't know anything about that. I said, yeah, DRIP funding, DRIP, deer range improvement programs. It's match funding. I mean, if our club puts in $1, then the department puts in $1, and holy cow, we could do some serious work and we could plant some trees, and this is a good thing. And I thought, we could get involved with that. They were pissed. They were pissed. Wanted nothing to do with it. I said, I don't understand, fellas. Why don't you want to do this? I said, why do we want to go out and do all that kind of work on public ground? That was the response I got. To which I replied, because we say we do. That's what we tell people. That's why our organization exists, because we're doing good work for the deer herd. And I get it. There's a lot of older guys that have been around a long time. They're tired. They don't necessarily want to go out and plant 10,000 trees. That's fine. I'm not asking them to. But to not even be willing to entertain going that direction at all was mind-blowing to me. And it's just a one anecdote of a much larger problem. And it's a mentality that we can all just drink coffee and drink beer and everything will be fine. And that narrative only occasionally gets interrupted for the wolf conversation, right? It's, damn the DNR and damn the wolves, and things will be okay tomorrow. Unfortunately, things won't be okay tomorrow. And our groups have to be a lot more proactive than they've ever been, because the issues that we're facing today are arguably more serious than they've ever been. And, I'm really personally disappointed that our clubs haven't done more in the last 30 years. It's these problems that we're having, like our habitat deficits, right? That's not a problem that just creeps up and 2 years ago, everything was fine. And now all of a sudden the habitat's destroyed. No, it didn't happen that way. That happened over 30, 40, 50 years that we've been sitting around drinking beer doing nothing. So that's not the kind of leadership that I can get behind in the future. We need to get involved. We need to be proactive, and we need to do things. And there's a time and a place to socialize and have fundraisers and do those things. And I support those things. But that is not doing the work of stewardship.
So from that, I think you can, like for the listener, you can say, okay, well, what are the things that we can do to kind of rectify some of this situation is to get involved with some of these organizations and not just pay the money, but to actually show up and try to make a change, or to be part of the leadership team, to be an advocate. And that person, we're speaking to the 0.001%, right?
Sure.
There is and when you talk about the habitat discussion, right, and how it happens over this long period of time, it just kind of has me thinking of I'm not a biologist. So, the reaction of people is like, well, what am I going to do? How am I supposed to do this? If you're in an organization that's, doing those sorts of things, then maybe it's a different situation. But for the casual listener, or, you've got the, in Michigan, I kind of like put it as like, and I think, gosh, I would say maybe naively, but I would put the UP in this category. Like the everyday UP hunter is like the quintessential, just like downstate. The Michigan, I got to get my buck guy. Like I got to shoot my buck. I shot my deer, whatever. And in the UP, probably even more so because they don't shoot does. So if I'm going to get a deer, it's going to be a buck, and it's going to, it's going to meet whatever regulation we have. But that guy doesn't necessarily, he's not the most involved,
Mm-hmm.
and, then we have like all of these discussions where it's about conservation, it's about stewardship, it's about those things. And then we've got the guys that just let them grow. We need APRs, 9 on one side, like Michigan's going to be the next state. We have all different walks of life, but how can they come together with the least amount of effort, I guess? We all want to do things in 30-second clips now. We swipe. We want everything. We want the easy way. We want everything, gift wrapped for us. We want hunting to be easy. All of these things. So, you and I have talked, and I think Howell does a really good job at putting out their information where, you can just click a link, you can send something to the senator, you can do this. It seems like we need to be advocates in that, if nothing else, with, who's being put in office or paying attention to who's being appointed to the NRC, all of those sorts of things. So like, for even the most casual of guys who's unhappy with the state of things in Michigan deer hunting context, like, where do we start to this ball rolling for the future, for our kids, for maybe not for our next year's hunting season, but where does this go in the future?
So you hit on a couple of good points there, and one of them was the instant gratification culture that we find ourselves in now, our brave new world of 30-second clips, as you put it. And our hunting fraternity is not immune to that disease, I'll call it. That's been a problem for us as well. There's no polite way to say it. There is nothing about being a steward of our natural resources that is quick or easy. It is in depth, it is time consuming, and it takes a great deal of effort over a period of years. So the model of stewardship defies the cultural norm. And that is kind of the conflict, right? It's this collision of ideologies between what's perceived as the old way and the new way. Well, unfortunately, where we find ourselves is at a very serious fork in the road, where we have to decide what kind of effort, what kind of personal investment we're willing to make to secure the future that we say we want. Talk is cheap and whiskey costs money. It's not the things that we wish for. It's not the things that we have polite conversations around the bar top about that matter. Words aren't going to solve anything. Stewardship is an action word, like I said. What is the easy mechanism? Well, there's not an easy one. But here's a motivator. There are people in this world who outnumber us thousands to one that do not like our way of life. They don't want you, Adam, to be able to continue to bow hunt the way you love to do. They don't want me to do it either. They would just assume that our way of life be vanquished to the pages of history. There are people that believe that hunting and fishing and all of these things that are part of our culture that we grew up with from the time that we were little children are just barbaric vestiges of this bygone era that have to be wiped out. It's hard to have that conversation with hunters because, all people are tribal to some extent. We tend to gravitate to people that share our views, that share our passions, right? We like people like us. We like to have conversations with people like us. Why? Because we can relate to each other. We have similar value systems. We have similar ethos. You're probably not going to wander into a Starbucks and sit down at a table full of purple-haired people and ask them if any of them like bow hunting, are you, Ed? Well, of course not. That being said, there has to be a recognition of what is at stake. And it is nothing less than our chosen way of life that's at stake. That is the bigger picture on a national level. And we've been very state-centric today in this discussion, but I want to zoom that out. These are national issues. Politics and natural resources, decision-making processes, and corruption and apathy and all those kinds of things, those are factors in other states. They're factors in Utah. They're factors in Colorado. They're factors in Vermont. They're factors in Ohio, whatever it is. There is not one state that is immune to these issues. There may be states that are functioning better. There may be states that have better management, but the problems are national problems. They're not state problems. And I think a lot of guys get lulled into a false sense of security, right? Maybe if you're you're a bow hunter out in Iowa, you're listening to this right now, right? And you're thinking, oh, well, man, it must suck for you Michigan boys, but I got a couple nice 160s this year on cam, and man, I can't wait to get out there with the bow. Don't be fool enough to think the fight won't come to your door, because it will. It's not if, it's just when. And I hate to get political about this stuff, but there's a real reality to the impacts that the politics have on our natural resources decision-making process. Elections have consequences. One of the things that I learned several years ago now was that the vast majority of hunters don't vote. I'll say that again. The vast majority of hunters don't vote. Well, what percentage? Well, I can't recall exactly what the percentages were, but I want to say that it was something in the neighborhood of 73% of hunters that were polled in this specific poll. And this was research done by Donald Trump's electoral team, or whatever you want to call him, during his first campaign. He was looking at hunter demographics. And one of the conversations that was had with President Trump about why he wasn't putting in so much effort with the outdoorsmen, he said, well, they don't vote. So he was applying his efforts elsewhere where he could back up the votes. That's a huge problem for us, okay? Because, and I'll put this back in the state context for a moment, if you're a hunter that's not getting out to the voting, the governor makes the appointments for NRC commission seats. And the NRC makes the laws that you, the hunter, are bound to obey. They form the policies that are going to influence the abundance or not of various natural resources, fish, birds, deer, bears, whatever, in your communities. So it's trickled down impacts. But the very stark reality is whoever holds the office holds the power. And, I'm pretty passionate about guys and ladies getting out and using their voice. And I've said this on other podcasts, and it bears repeating now. The most powerful tool that you have at your disposal as an individual is your own voice. One of the most powerful things you can use that voice to do is cast a vote. All across this country, good men and women sign on the dotted line to ensure that that right is maintained and protected. And I think it's a disgrace that not more of us are showing up and doing our due diligence and casting that vote. It's the essence of liberty. It's your most sacred duty to cast that vote. And here's the thing. The other side that I referenced earlier, that doesn't like our way of life and maybe doesn't value things the way we do, or doesn't want them to be used the way that we want to use them, I promise you they're voting. Maybe twice, maybe 3 times, depending. But they're out there in force every day. They're very active. And I'll give you an example. There's a lady who shows up to every single Natural Resources Commission meeting every single month, and she speaks every single month. She's from an anti-hunting organization. I cannot remember the last time she was absent from a commission meeting. That ought to set people back in their chairs who are listening to this. That is how hard and how diligently people who oppose us are working. So if we're not at least applying an equal effort, we're losing ground. That's something to think about.
So as a devil's advocate, right? And I think that there may be, you and about 41 other people who could speak to this, just given your numbers, right? So for people, voters, whomever who are jaded and they say, my vote doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. And hell, look at Jordan and his cohorts who spent all this time and effort, all this stuff, and they didn't matter. What do you say from how do you keep from being jaded in that sort of thing to feel like, I mean, even to be shown that your opinion doesn't matter?
Right. How do you move forward being kicked in the teeth, and how can you justify it? Well, it's pretty simple. Every war is comprised of a series of battles, and you're not going to win them all. This was a battle that we lost, and it stung. It hurt. It sucked. It absolutely sucked. But it's not the end of the war. That continues. There's many more battles to come, and we got to get up and dust ourselves off and get kitted up and get back in the fight, because our way of life depends on it. There isn't time for me to sit around and feel sorry for myself and opine about how I wish the commission would listen to me. I tell you what I did. I did what anybody who loses at something should do. I evaluated the good and the bad, and what can I learn from this? Well, what I learned from this is very simple. The system that we have is broken, and continuing to soldier on dutifully for conservation and stewardship and all these noble ideologies, bashing my face against the wall of the Natural Resources Commission, is foolish. Continuing the same procedures, expecting different outcomes, is the definition of insanity. Well, what do? You can't go around the Natural Resources Commission because they're appointed by the governor. So then what's the answer, Jordan? What do we do now? Well, very simply, we have to fight for change within the system that we have. So how do we do that? For example, we talked early in the podcast about how can we find our NRC commissioners and when their appointments are up. Well, we discussed that on the DNR website. Okay. So step one is being educated about those terms. Who are your commissioners? When do their terms expire? Are they eligible for reappointment? Well, what do you do with that information? Well, you and your friends who, for example, don't like the job that Commissioner A is doing, you write a letter. You write a letter to the governor. Each of you. It doesn't have to be some beautiful oration. You're not writing for the New York Times. It can be one paragraph that you don't like the job that this commissioner is doing. You don't feel like they're serving the resource. You don't feel like they're serving the people of the state of Michigan the way they ought to, and you oppose their reappointment. Sign it and mail it. You can do that in 5 minutes at your kitchen table. That's something real, something tangible, something actionable that anybody who wants to can do, and it takes 5 minutes to do it. Now, somebody out there is listening to this going, yeah, okay, Jordan. Yeah, I'm sure Whitmer cares about deer, and especially deer in the UP. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. 1 letter doesn't matter. 5 letters don't matter. 10 letters don't matter. 200-300 letters matter. Why? Because she doesn't want to hear about it. She appointed these individual commissioners to be a barrier between her and the deer issue. It's their job to handle the natural resources matters. And if it gets to her desk that it isn't being handled, she's going to do what any leader will do and walk down the hall and put her boot in somebody's ass and ask why she's hearing about it. Somebody's not doing their job. If this is getting to my desk, why are there 200 letters on my desk about deer? That conversation's going to happen. That's going to put things in motion that are going to facilitate change. But it begins with one person taking 5 minutes to write a letter and encouraging another person that they know to do the same. You know, people are going to say, well, Jordan, it'll take an army to get something like this done. You're right, it will. Fortunately for us, there's 500,000 hunters in the state of Michigan. We've got an army. We're just not using it. That's something simple that you can do. Okay. The next thing I'm going to tell you is that if you want a good employee, that's predicated on the idea that you have good resumes in the stack that you're looking at. If you got nothing but lousy resumes in the stack, you're not going to get a good employee out. The commission is no different. We need more people that participate actively in our way of life, that are passionate about the future of our outdoor heritage, to put their name in the hat. It costs you nothing. You can go online, you can fill out the paperwork, you can call your legislators and say, hey, I'm interested in being an NRC commissioner. What do I need to know? What do I need to do? How do I go about this? Now, can everybody afford to go and do these things and deal with the loss of income? No, they can't. I recognize that. It's not a paid position. We discussed that early on in the show. But there's enough people that can. There's people who are independently wealthy. There's people who maybe, came right out of high school, went in the military, did 20 years, and they've got time. Maybe there's people who own their own business and they've got time. Whatever the case may be, there are options. But here's the thing. Back to the other side. Rest assured, Humane Society, SPCA, all those types, attorneys for animals, they're putting people in the stack. Are we? I don't think we are. And I think when you look at the composition of the commission and how it changes over time, and what to me appears to be a more liberal ideology than there's ever been, it's evident that there's impact there. There's influence there. And if we want to protect our way of life, we've got to put good resumes in the stack. That's action item number 2. Number 3, and this is a very simple one. Very simple. Be accountable. On a personal level, be accountable. Tomorrow morning when you get up and you go to shave your face in the mirror, have a conversation in your head about what the future is going to look like for your kids or for your grandkids if you continue on the present course that you're on personally. And maybe that's a good conversation. Maybe you smile and you think, yeah, I'm doing the work. I'm active on a grassroots level. Now I'm helping with hunter safety. I'm planting trees. I'm participating in all these programs. Yeah, I like what I see. Maybe you're a guy who says, my membership's paid up and I went to the meeting last month, had some beers with the fellas, but I don't remember the last time I actually did anything. If that's you, turn over a new leaf. Hold yourself accountable. Because all the things that you love, all the things that you hold dear, all the things that you hope your children and their children have won't be there if you don't change. It's not an unwinnable fight, but it is an uphill fight. And it begins with the man in the mirror.
Well, man, I think that's some pretty good, somewhat heavy stuff there a little bit. I mean, I'm just thinking here, like, so how many resumes do you have in there? How many times is your name in the stack? I'd have to say, like, because I mean, just from this, it seems like that you're the guy, right? It seems like you would be someone that we would want representing us, and to even to be able to motivate somebody else who shares the same beliefs or things like that. It seems like that's what we need on those boards, and those types of things. And it does have me even thinking about, those letters to the governor and things like that we need to, just almost get like a form letter like Howell does and send out and say, hey, guys, fill this out once a month and just keep sending it in. Here's the address. Here's the things to do. I feel like we've kind of covered the whole gamut in that last little bit on, kind of like actionable items to go ahead and, not only advocate for change, but kind of like take the first steps and actually making change. Is there anything else that we haven't covered in this that you think is, kind of relevant to the discussion, whether it's in Michigan or globally?
I guess there's a couple points we can try to hit quick. One is that we're talking about changing a broken system, right? And one of the ways that I think that our current Natural Resources Commission is very broken is that, like we have right now, we got a whole bunch of attorneys who are trout fishermen, right? If we're making trout regs, I'm a happy dude. Hell yes, this is great. All the trout experts making trout regs. That's a win. Unfortunately, I'm a deer guy and the trout guys don't know shit about deer. That's a problem. And that's a recurring problem. Having requisite knowledge across all disciplines is truthfully a tall order. And I'll just use myself an example. I don't spend a tremendous amount of time pursuing partridge, upland game, right? That's not really my bag. Have I done it? Yes, I have. Do I do it every year? Generally. Do I feel comfortable sitting down and delving into, okay, how do we have better habitat for partridge, and how do we manage our bird population more effectively? Hell no. That's not me. That's not my expertise. And that's where our commission fails. I would like to see seats that are reserved for specific, I'll call them categories. So, for example, there needs to always be a commissioner who has a background and expertise in forestry. There needs to always be a guy who's got expertise and background in big game hunting, upland game hunting, fisheries, migratory birds. On and on we go. There is always at least one person at the table who is a bona fide, I'll say expert, loosely, air quotes, in that specific discipline. That's got to happen. And maybe we reserve, 5 or 6 seats, and we leave one wide open for an independent guy like you, Adam, that we just want some broader input. We want a ground pounder from, Timbuktu to come in here and kick in his 2 cents because it's fresh perspective and he didn't go through the brainwashing of, the local university. I think that would be valuable. I think we have to restructure the commission to facilitate that, because presently there's no qualifications, there's no structure to that beyond the political limitations of how many appointments per party you can have. And to get those things done will require legislative action. And that's no easy thing to do. I mean, we're talking about years in the process. And again, the people who are going to be involved are 0.01%, as you said. But those are things that we have to have some discussion about in the long term. It's not enough just to try to get good resumes in the stack. I think we have to try to make the commission itself better structured, because if we do that, it'll facilitate better outcomes. One of the other things hand in glove with that, and I talked about it earlier in the podcast, is Proposal G of 1996. I'll call it the sound science mandate. We've absolutely got to hold the NRC's ass to the fire with Proposal G. We have to live and die by Proposal G. Because if we don't, what do we need the DNR for? We don't need the data. We don't need the charts. We don't need the graphs, because we're going to do what we want anyways. We have to follow the science. Anytime we veer away from that, there's trouble, there's problems. We saw that earlier in this past year. I shouldn't say past year. It was just earlier this winter, this spring, with the coyote debacle. Predator hunters got 3 months knocked off a coyote season with absolutely zero justification, zero biological imperative. Just boom, this is what we're doing. Proposal G was violated in that instance. And, all the water that's gone under the bridge with deer regulations lately, and there being no biological support for continuing on the path that we're on, I would argue again, we're looking at a Proposal G violation. And unfortunately, I'm not aware of a single deer hunting organization in the state of Michigan who's filed a legal challenge to the NRC's rule. We're sitting on our hands. Silence is consent. That's the big thing. So, and again, this goes back to what's your membership dollar getting you with your organization. You need to have conversations with your leadership and be active and be engaged. What are we doing not only about plant trees or supplemental feeding or whatever it is? What are we doing about policy? How is our organization handling policy? Who's representing us? What are they saying? If we lose Proposal G, all of our resources are in trouble. I don't care if you're a steelhead fisherman, you're a grouse hunter, you're a bear houndsman, you're a white-tailed deer diehard. We all ought to be able to unify behind sound scientific management of our resources. We got to live and die by that. Presently, I think that we're struggling to do that. But again, it's education. It's having these conversations. And these aren't sexy, fun conversations to have, right? You're like, oh man, you're right, but this is heavy. Yeah, it's heavy. And these are not the fun conversations we like to have. I'd rather be sitting down with you, Adam, telling bullshit and lies stories about the big one that got away around a campfire with a couple of drinks. I would much rather be doing that. But our way of life depends on having the tough conversations. And that's what we've done here today.
So real quick, I want to ask, just because you were saying like, how far is your dollar going? Like for the throw my $50 in the hat, who are our most advantageous, or who are the good actors? We've kind of talked about, in your neck of the woods, some of the bad actors and kind of how that happens. But where's your dollar going the furthest? Who are the most vocal and the guys that are out there doing it that could use the funding? I mean, if you're just going to support an organization.
Well, there's two that definitely leap to the top of the charts for me recently. And that's because, and I'll admit, there's some personal bias here because I've interacted with their leadership. But, I've interacted with the leadership of UP Whitetails too. So I guess that's fair. I think the Michigan Trappers and Predator Callers Association, MTPCA, is a good organization. They actually did file a legal challenge against the NRC's decision to reduce the coyote season. They are asserting that Proposal G was violated. They're putting their money where their mouth is, and they're standing up and they're knuckling up for what's right and for the future of our hunting heritage. And they're not a huge, monstrous organization. They're a state organization. They're not national. So it's a David and Goliath fight, right? And they're walking into the courtroom against the Natural Resources Commission, represented by the Attorney General, with bottomless coffers for legal expense, courtesy of the Michigan taxpayer. But there they are, leading the way and setting the example. And I think that, anybody that enjoys, predator hunting and trapping and those kinds of things, that's a great organization to be involved with. The second one would be the Michigan Bowhunter Association with Bob Jones. I have had a tremendous amount of conversation with Bob Jones. And if there's one thing I can tell you about Bob, it's that Bob is very passionate, but Bob is all about integrity in our natural resources decision-making process. Bob is huge about the science, even if it conflicts with his personal views. And I've seen Bob have to step back and say, yeah, I was wrong about this. And he was man enough to do that. And, Bob was an absolute workhorse during the DMI process. A lot of people don't know this, but Bob actually served on both the UP and the LP DMI teams. He had a member of Michigan Bowhunters from the UP that was supposed to be a member of our team, but unfortunately there was some incidents at work and the guy got mandated. He couldn't fulfill the obligation. So Bob stepped up and did double duty. So I got to work with Bob a lot and listen to his views and listen to the kind of person that he is behind the name badge to get a feeling for the fiber of the man. And I definitely think that Bob is leading Michigan bow hunters in a positive direction with an eye towards the future. And I think that there's good potential for growth there with that organization that maybe didn't exist with old leadership. I'm very convinced that Bob is taking Michigan bow hunters in a good direction.
Awesome. Well, yeah. So for the listeners out there who are, looking to make some change, not only with, their advocacy, but also with their pocketbooks, those are some organizations. And I've had some interactions with Bob myself. And, I think it's funny that you were saying that he has like huge feelings and all that, because Bob's what he lacks in stature, he makes up in feelings and passion for bow hunting. But so for people who like want to reach out to you or have questions or want to know what they can do more, where can they reach out to you, or how can they find you?
So they can reach out to me on social media. I got Facebook. You can look me up there. You can also send me an email. My email address is ironman_86@hotmail.com. I'm usually responsive within a couple of days to that. Anybody that has questions, comments, wants to give me feedback, wants to know how they get engaged, how they get plugged in, what they need to do, I'm more than happy to help. And if you just want to call me up and you want to trade deer stories, I'm game for that too. I love talking deer, and I'd rather do that than this. So those are the two best ways to get a hold of me. Now I've got a publicly listed phone number too, so people can reach out that way. A lot of the things that we talked about, it all boils down to, as I said, personal responsibility. And for me, I said that I had to step back and I had to learn. And one of the things that I learned is that I was not having the kind of impact I wanted to have from this side of the table. And, that's why I made the decision to get involved. And I threw my hat in the ring for an NRC seat when one opens up. That was no small consideration for me, but you got to put your money where your mouth is. If you're going to ask other people to step up, you got to step up. And I've always been a person that I lead from the front, not the back. And, I'm in some conversations right now as well. Good friends of mine that have a lot of experience with nonprofits. We're working on developing a brand new deer advocacy group that will be statewide for Michigan as well. Because bluntly stated, I just think it's time for change, broad spectrum. I think people are hungry for change. They're hungry for something new. They're looking for answers. And I think that I've seen a lot of unity from people that I haven't before. Usually we're busy killing each other over APRs or how many of those should we shoot, or should we have crop damage tags, or whatever it is. But I've talked to people across a lot of organizations that are all not happy with where things are at. And, that tells me that maybe we're ready for something new, that we're ready to mend old wounds and forge new alliances and move forward. And I'm hoping that a new advocacy group can be a piece of that puzzle and provide another opportunity for people.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to seeing more from you on that front, and hope to see you on the NRC here as soon as possible. So thanks for taking the time tonight and kind of breaking down kind of like A, how it all works, B, how it all went down, and then kind of lighting that fire under guys to kind of step up and make a change. So thank you.
No, thank you so much for having me, Adam, for sharing your platform. I appreciate the invitation.
Awesome. Thanks.
Shoot straight and come hungry, my friends. This is Duck Camp Dinners.
Oh, he mad. Big things planned with some alligator, some ducks. It's gonna be good, and I'm looking forward to cooking.
Don't miss a new episode of Duck Camp Dinners. It's coming at you every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on Waypoint TV.